Hello, welcome to Cooper Union. I'm Mike Essl. I'm a former comic book shop employee and now dean of the Cooper Union School of Art. Cooper Union graduates have a long history in Marvel Comics. Carl Pfeiffer was an early artist on Marvel's Submariner. Matt Baker, one of the first Black artists in comic books, penciled Tales to Astonish and Two Gun Kid. Victor Ochoa, one of my students, designed logos for Marvel. And Bill Mantlo wrote almost 700 comics for Marvel and co-created Rocket Raccoon and Cloak and Dagger. If it's not already obvious, I'm a total Marvel nerd, and I'm thrilled to be included in Marvel by Design and on this panel tonight. Thank you to Liz, Paul, and Chris for joining us tonight, and to the Cooper Union and Gestalten team for putting this event together. And thank you all for joining us. We hope to see you back here soon. And now please join me in welcoming the editor of Marvel by Design, Liz Stinson.
All right, I'm here. Thanks, Mike, for that really lovely intro. And thanks everyone for joining us for this virtual conversation about design and comics. So maybe some of you are here for the design talk, maybe some of you are here for the comics talk, but we hope that you all leave with an appreciation for how these two worlds intersect with each other actually quite a bit. Fortunately, we have an all-star panel to explore the idea, so I'm going to introduce them now. You all obviously know Mike Essl, who is Dean of the Cooper Union, a graphic designer and an obsessive comic book lover whose deep knowledge of Marvel logos and lettering made this book so much better. Also here is Paul Sahre, a graphic designer and writer who is a regular visual contributor to the New York Times and who has designed book covers for the likes of Chuck Klosterman and Malcolm Gladwell. And last but absolutely not least is Chris Eliopoulos, an author and letterer who many of you probably know for his vast contributions to Marvel's lettering universe through his studio virtual calligraphy. So all three of these people contributed essays to the book Marvel by Design, the book we're here to discuss, and just a little bit about the book to set the stage for our conversation. So last year, Marvel and the publisher Gestalten decided to work on a book that examines the wide influence of Marvel's visual language. Obviously, there are no shortages of books on Marvel comics, but few have taken a close study of the brand's aesthetic through the prism of design. So what do we mean by design? Well, we mean all of the disparate visual components that exist within the pages of a comic book. So things like logos, the structure of a comic book cover, and the nuances of lettering, or in non-comic book speak, all of the text that you see in a comic book. We wanted to use this book as a way to pause and just explore the minutia of all of these different crafts that, when brought together, give Marvel its distinct visual language and creates this sphere of visual influence on other aspects of culture like art and design and digital interfaces. So tonight we're going to explore all of this as much as time permits, but I wanted to get started with a little bit of a softball question for our panelists. And Mike, I'm going to start with you. Can you just tell us a little bit about how you came to your love of comic books and how it impacted your path as a designer? We'll start there.
Sure. I was a huge fan of the Batman 1966 TV show when I was a kid. It was on syndication 2 times a day, every day. And I pretty much watched it like religion. I couldn't get enough of it. And then I realized, oh, wait, there are other stories that I could read. So like at the supermarket or places where comics used to be sold, I just started buying Batman comics. And I ended up with about 300 Batman comics by the end of it. And as I got into comics, that oddly enough, because of Kiss's Marvel comic, or Marvel's Kiss comic, I should say, pardon me, something about that comic led me to seek out one of Kiss's records, and that record led me to study graphic design. And so it started with Batman and went to Marvel and then went to the band Kiss. And now here I am at Cooper Union.
Paul, do you have, you're laughing.
I'm definitely laughing. I know why Mike bought that Kiss comic book. They put some of their own blood in the ink.
Yes.
They printed with their own blood. That got me too.
Can't tell if that's a joke. That's
No,
not
that's real.
No, that's real. They put their own blood in at the printer into the ink.
just a drop.
No, I think it was more than that, but I don't know. It wasn't a lot more than that. I mean, Mike, I don't know about you, but I thought they put a lot. I thought the whole thing was printed with blood, but
Yeah, the gimmick of it really sold me because
Yeah.
there was like almost like a press release in the comic of them doing that. And then it was the first time in my life I'd ever heard anybody talk about printing presses or printing ink or plates, or so it really opened me up to a whole other world. It's kind of ridiculous because I don't think it's a great comic. I mean, I kind of love it now, but
Yeah.
it really got me to this place where I am now.
Getting to answer your question quickly, my connection is less demonstrable than Mike's. I think I feel like there's sort of a gulf between them, but I would say it definitely, I drew a lot, and that's drawing got me into graphic design. And funny enough, I didn't really draw comic book characters. I drew house pets and things like that, band logos, but not comic book characters. So I'm not exactly sure, but I will say this, that the idea of, being able to make and create your own world sitting there alone at a drawing board, I turned into that essentially. It's just a different type of storytelling. And now there's a computer sitting on it, I guess, right now.
Chris, as a letterer, do you consider yourself a designer?
At times, definitely. I think these days it's weird. I kind of turn lettering into two phases: is the pre-computer and post-computer. And the pre-computer it was really like calligraphy and sign painting was sort of like the mode. And then with computers now, I see it more as a graphic design system. So there's always design involved. There's placement of text on a piece of paper. There's sound effects and logos, which tend to be designed for a purpose. Like we've discussed in the book that sound effects can tell you if something is awful sounding or just fun sounding just by the look of it. So even that is a graphic design. I even had a legitimate painter copy some of my sound effects into their painted works and tried to sell them for tens of thousands of dollars, which of course I got no money for. So it's also high art at this point, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, who was that painter? I'm just curious.
I don't remember. A friend had taken a picture at a gallery and noticed it was my work, sent it to me, and I kind of, as we all do, run to Twitter and say, what the heck is going on here? I even got a call from for an article about in an art magazine talking about, because it goes back to Lichtenstein, who basically ripped off comic book artists, made millions of dollars, and then the people whose art he stole, died in destitution. So I kind of made a little stink, and then they contacted me. I don't remember the artist's name, but it was one of those moments where, they deny that they stole anything or repurposed it for high art. What I was doing was low art. So.
Right. That distinction is always interesting to draw. And that's something we do cover in the book, is looking at how comic book visuals have influenced pop art specifically, like you mentioned. One thing I wanted to ask all of you, just like sort of like set the table for this, is the book is sort of positing that Marvel has its own distinct design language compared to, let's say, like DC Comics or any other comic book publisher. Do you think that's true? And I'd be very curious to know, if so, like, how would you describe Marvel's aesthetic or visual language?
I'll let the scholars go first. I'm in the meat of things. I sort of see it from the ground floor, so I'll let you guys.
Well, Mike, let me jump in here. I would definitely say I would draw a distinction between what's happening, what defines Marvel's cover, comics now, from like the Silver Age, which is where a lot of the genesis for a lot of everything that we've been seeing now, certainly in movies, comes from. I would say, and so I'm leaning a little bit more on its foundation when I say this, but I think Marvel just took it further, than DC, for instance. Certainly the superhero genre, but everything was action, everything was exaggeration, everything was a sales pitch. And they embraced that and made it fun and brought you along, everything was 3 exclamation points. That's what I see as the main difference.
What about you, Mike? I mean, do you have anything to add to that? I love in your essay, Paul, you mentioned how everything is an exaggeration, particularly on the cover. And is that something that you've observed as well, Mike?
Yeah, I have this theory that in my research, I came across like a lot of the letterers that worked for Marvel had a stack of Xeroxed lettering from past issues that I guess created an archive. And I have a copy of it. It's like maybe 50 to 75 pages of just examples over time. And I know, and Chris, I don't know if you got one of these, but I know that often when a new letterer started, they would give them these things. And I think what we would call that in design is a style guide. And I think that helped unify the look all through the Silver Age and into the Bronze Age. And because even if you look at the sort of the cover typography in my background, like that, the spirit of that lettering, I think, was kept alive for a very long time and was incredibly consistent. I'm a little biased. It's what I care about the most is the lettering and the logos.
And it's pretty much gone now, so.
On the covers, it's gone.
Yeah,
I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you a secret that if you're talking about the cover copy, like booklet, right? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
So basically when I started at Marvel and I went into the lettering department, they handed me basically, it was just sort of like just stacks of the original cover copy that was done by like Danny Crespi or Mori Kuramoto. And I basically Xeroxed all of that stuff, put it in a 3-ring binder and created a bunch for everybody on staff. So somehow it's gotten out, but I was the one that pieced that all together and basically created like sort of the, hey, this is the way it should look. These are the best. These are the masters. Let's try to live up to this. I never did. I never got to that point, but around 90, 91, maybe a little bit of 92, you can see my cover copy on most of the comics of that age. But yeah, it's, I will say from being in the trenches, the Marvel style is, holy crap, we got to get this done now. That's the style. A lot of it was based on printing issues back in the day. The reason, the balloon lettering was all uppercase was because, the printer's ink would seep in. And if you printed upper and lowercase, they sometimes filled in too much, or you had ascenders and descenders that would sort of take up too much space. And Stan was very verbose. And so, you had to fit a lot in. But also just like, I know from experience, a lot of books were lettered overnight. A lot of books, I mean, in the book, the Venom logo that I did, I was dating my now wife, and she had planned on my birthday to take me out and do an amazing day. And I got a call from Danny Fingeroth, who basically said, we need a Venom logo for a new book and we need it today. So I canceled my plans with her. She still married me, and proceeded to sketch out like 4 or 5 design ideas, sent it off. They agreed to it. I just hand did it in less than an hour or something like that. And they still use that logo to this day. So a lot of it is just necessity is the needs to get to where we are. So a lot of what you see is just hurry up, get it done. And this is the best you're going to get. Now with computers, they can just, we've created fonts and we do that stuff digitally, but it's still the same rush till the last minute.
Chris, just pull back the curtains for us a little bit. And why is it so last minute for people who don't make comic books? Can you tell us, like, why are you working overnight on something? Like, the printing process, at least for a book, for example, is so long. It's kind of unfathomable that like you're dashing something off and then that's what you see.
Yeah. So pre-computers, the dash was the lettering was done mostly on the boards, on the artwork itself. So you had somebody up the chain who needed to get working and needed to get it done. So, it was up to the letterer to get like 10 to 15 pages lettered a day to get it off to the inker so they could get ahead, because the colors couldn't start until the inker got it done. And so there was this mad dash. A lot of times we would also do it on overlays on vellum, and then it would be pasted up in the bullpen. So physically, like, you would paint white on the back of it, you'd put glue, and you would stick it onto the boards. And if we were that late, I was told right in the beginning that comics aren't widgets. We're not making widgets here. There are people involved, and some of these artists, have lives that they want to see their children, and so they can't draw as fast as we all want them to. So you sort of have to make, arrangements to get things done quicker. These days with computer stuff, we're the tail end of the dog. We're the last ones to get the pages. Usually the colorist is already almost done with the pages by the time we get them. And again, if you look at today's artwork versus maybe the 1940s, things are much more detailed. It takes a lot longer to draw them. They're running late. I've had points where I've literally lettered a book the same day it went to the press. Like, it literally went to the printer that night. It's not what we really want to be doing because the mistakes get through. But that's the deal when you have monthly publications.
Right. And also kind of the charm, like it's not absolutely perfect. And I think that there's something to that.
Yeah.
It sounds like today the way that people are working is less of, to use like maybe an unfair comparison, like an assembly line relay race, and more like you're working at the same time, you're working in parallel with each other. And has that impacted what you see on the comic book page? I mean, you say that there's more detail in some of the artwork now, but like, is that on the whole a good thing? Are there any drawbacks to it? Curious for your thoughts on that. And feel free to, I know you all, you don't necessarily make comic books, Paul and Mike, but maybe you've observed the evolution of some of these visuals over the years.
Yeah, somebody else speak. I'm getting too verbose.
If it's the switch to digital, the thing I think that I miss, I'll just say that I miss it, is the variety in the lettering and the individual styles of the letters. I think some of that's still there in digital, but I think, like using Illustrator to draw something is a lot different, or maybe not a lot different, but it doesn't have the same quickness that the hand lettering did. And I do miss that. I also miss like very small things, like the shape of the word balloon would be, more organic, a little weirder in shape. Now they're not everybody's, but now they're seem mostly perfect these days. This is a minor.
In terms of, since I contributed an essay on covers. I mean, Alex Ross bears a lot of blame for a lot of stuff that I see in a great way. I mean, he's an amazing artist. But I see a lot of that super realistic thing that when he started doing it, when did Marvels come out? That series
91, 92.
That's the first time I remember seeing that, and it blew me away because it was he draws and paints in such a realistic style, so everything sort of became sort of three-dimensional in this way that and that series was all from the perspective of the person on the street, and it really made you think, oh my God, yeah, absolute terror, with this giant creature kind of, stepping over you as you're going to get groceries or whatever you happen to be doing. And it really brought that to the fore. Anyway, I see a lot of his influence on comics now. They're unarguably way more refined and visually anyway than they ever were before. You still have that thing where Chris, you can speak to this, but it's like the cover art is not what the inside is, and they use the cover to sort of draw you in, but then you're like, the rest of the comic is not in that style. And they've done that forever. I remember feeling that I was Spider-Man almost exclusively growing up. And for a long time, John Romita was doing the covers, but then the inside was somebody else. I can't remember who was doing it. A number of different artists were doing the pencils inside. And I always like, I wanted it like the whole Romita comic, but the cover was different. So that still happens, right? So a lot of energy is put onto the covers, and then the insides sort of have to be still done quicker. So I think the spirit of it still is there.
Yeah, it's interesting. For the book, we actually talked to Tom Scioli about his Fantastic Four Grand Design comic book, which I think is a really interesting example, because to sort of achieve this old school look, you have to do a lot of things. Like, you have to manipulate the comic book itself. And he crumpled up a paper bag and then scanned that to put an overlay into Photoshop to make it look old, and make it he did everything in graphite pencil. So that way it had that smudgy look of the 1940s, 1950s, when printing wasn't, as good as it is today. And I thought that was really interesting that now you have to just really try to achieve that effect, instead of it just being the natural way of things.
Yeah, there's that's two camps now. It's sort of, there is, we're competing against movies and television shows where superheroes are come to life. And you want to keep those customers coming in. So you sort of want to give them the Alex Rosses and, all the people who are drawing more realistic. And then there are the people who want to go back. It's hysterical that we're spending thousands of dollars on computer equipment to make things look like they were done 40 years ago, and crappy. And you just go, we were trying to get out of that when we were in it. We were trying to break out of the idea that, it printed horribly. The image revolution in the early 90s, the big takeaway was, oh my God, the coloring is so much better over here, this computer coloring, than what we've been doing before. And now we've got every color under the sun. You can make any effect you can in a computer. And half the time people just want to go back and go to 64 colors again. So it's fun to see the nostalgia, and also trying to compete with the modern era of, superhero movies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
sorry, Liz, but one point I would make there too is, as Chris has said, that the comic books have been, what they end up being is a byproduct of what's possible within a certain amount of time. And I'm curious what Mike would think about this, because I have seen a couple of sort of clearly retro comics recently, and it seems weird to me. I miss it, but I don't know if I'd wish to have them made so that they look fake old. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think there's some charm in that. I think, we're I'm working on a book right now where we're getting the artwork from basically what you see on Marvel Unlimited, which is the digitized version of the comics. And, there was a debate among the people working on the book, should we add a yellow tint behind? Should we, even though these are the digital ones, should we make them look more real? And I was like, no. It felt like purposely going backwards is maybe not the move, right? It's when I want to see a yellowed page with bad ink, I just pull out a comic out of my box and look at a yellow page with bad ink. I don't want to be in the business of, say, recreating that. I don't think, although I do love both the grand designs that have come out so far. I think they're really fun. It's just a very specific aesthetic, I think.
Totally. It's a stylistic choice at this point.
Yeah.
It's not something dictated by limitations, which is something that I heard over and over again in talking to people for this book, is how comic books are really, the aesthetic of them have always been defined by limitations, whether that's printing, whether that's space. And Chris, something that I thought was really interesting in your essay that you brought up was that you talk about the work you do as a letterer as working within a series of constraints, and you sort of talked about that a little bit already, but I think it's something that all really great designers tend to thrive on is constraints, generally speaking. And maybe people would want to hear about some of those limitations that shape what we see in the comic book page. I mean, like it was really striking to me when you talked about thinking about lettering is not just like text, but it's placement. It's sort of there's an element of navigation. It's almost like a layout design.
Yeah, that's the part of the job that they don't really tell you about in the beginning when you start up. You just think it's about learning how to, basically when you're hand lettering, to be a machine, and basically they want you to be a computer that makes the same R 500 times and it looks exactly the same, but maybe not exactly. But they don't tell you is that a lot of the job of a letterer is to lead the eye around a page. As much as these artists are talented, sometimes their layouts aren't the best, and you have to lead the reader through panel order. Sometimes there's, panel 1 is top, panel 2 is below it, and panel 3 is over. Well, the reader doesn't know if it's supposed to be like which one to go to. So you sort of have to place your word balloons to sort of guide the eye through the scene. Also direct it to certain important things, or, a sound effect to kind of design the page. Like one of my favorite runs was Walt Simonsen and John Workman's run on Thor, because John just sort of made these graphically designed sound effects that would just take up a page or lead you around the page. And that's the thing. It's sort of like there's a lot of, everybody goes, lettering, anybody can do it. I have good handwriting, I can do it. But it is a form of design and a form of storytelling that you sort of have to learn by doing. And it takes practice, it takes work. So, I'm in the trenches. I'm not the best of the best. I've seen I'm good enough to know who the best of the best are. And you sort of learn from them. Like we were saying earlier on, when I learned, it was basically, I would take a printout of a full page of lettering, I'd put vellum over it, and basically just trace the lettering that came before. I would learn how to shave down a pen. And I learned, not only did I learn how to physically learn how to letter, but it also made me, I think, a better writer, because I was working tactilely with the words, and you sort of become part of it and you learn storytelling. And so I think I became a better storyteller because I was a letterer. So there was all these different aspects and assets that you get being a letterer. So it's not just throw the balloon down, throw a pointer at the guy's mouth and call it a day. So there are a lot of people who are much better than me that do it much better and know that rule, and that's why they're the great ones.
I mean, one quick follow-up to that. One thing that really struck me from your essay is the line that you used. I think it was, lettering is like inking the writer's words, which is really interesting. And that idea seems especially pertinent to something like onomatopoeia, sound effects, which is such a richly visual way of articulating sound. And I think that's something that a lot of people are interested in. And so, just to dig into the process piece of this a little bit, this might be hard for you to tell me, but how do you think about a sound effect? I mean, can you give us a glimpse into your process? How do you make those words come to life, and how do, the surrounding drawings or images in the book sort of impact that?
Yeah. A lot of it, it does. A lot of it, when we were hand lettering it, it was very organic, and you would sort of follow the lead of the artist. The penciler, if you're doing a sound effect for John Romita, it's going to look different than if Bill Sienkiewicz is drawing it, right? Bill's got this scratchy style. It's kind of wild and crazy. And having a very simple, bubble shaped sound effect might distract from the artwork. You want it to be organic and be a part of it. And so, when I was working over Bill's stuff, I would tend to be a little bit more scratchy and a little hectic when we would do stuff. Also, just in terms of the storytelling, if something, is, a monster screaming, having a little heart-shaped bubble sound effect is not really going to work, not going to cut it. So there are choices that are made that also help with the storytelling. And then, these days when we're doing it digitally, like I've created a bunch of fonts. Like, so most of today's books, the fonts are all mine on Marvel's books. I have a team of guys that work with me who, use those fonts, and sound effect fonts are some of them. The other thing, when I mentioned the inking of the writer's words, is these days, so many of them have grown up reading comics that for them, they can't really fully have the finished product in their heads until they see it lettered. So in the digital age, it's now become lettering is almost like a first or second draft for them. And they'll go back in and rewrite stuff and change things and move things around. So it's another tool for the writer and the artist to sort of get a better sense of what story they want to tell and how to tell it the best way they can. So from the hand lettering to digital lettering, it's just a different form of storytelling and trying to make sure that we make the reader's experience the best it can be.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about logos now. And Mike, I feel like you are the resident expert. I mean, well, maybe Chris, you are too. Paul, maybe you are as well. You all are probably experts.
That descended quick.
Let's be real. But one thing that was really fun to read was how you said, logos in comic books break all of the rules that you learned in design school.
Oh, yeah.
So I want to know what those rules are and how comic books break them.
Sure. I remember when I studied identity design at Cooper Union that Paul Rand, the graphic designer, was put on this pedestal as somebody who made these beautifully simple, excellent logos. And, the logos I loved were like the Ghost Rider logo and the Iron Man logo and the let's say the ABC and the IBM logo. They're very geometric. They're very, the word I would use is clean, right? They're made to be reproduced over and over again and really small. But Marvel logos are doing battle on the cover with the heroes. The logo can get smashed by the Hulk or twisted by the Dark Phoenix, and the logo it becomes part of the whole image. And, the ABC logo might stand a chance in that environment, but I think one with, a 3D bevel and an extrusion and a colored drop shadow, in my opinion, I think it's equipped to survive in that environment. The thing that gets me is that I was told in design school to almost never be literal. And, like Marvel logos are the epitome of literalness, at least the vintage ones. The just to mention the Ghost Rider logo again, it like has engine parts inside of it. It's on fire and the type looks scorched by the fire, also that we absolutely understand what Ghost Rider is, which is just the opposite of what I learned in school. And I think it works just again, because the world of Marvel is so extreme.
Yeah. And I would add to that modernism, essentially came from Europe to the United States. And, there are graphic designers who, European American graphic designers like Massimo Vignelli, who just passed away, who is famous for saying, you can only use 5 typefaces. That's it, and it's, I think it's in a lot of ways, because I'm looking at the type and back of Mike right now, and these aren't logos. These are little, headlines. But there's some seriously wonky type back there. Like a graphic designer would look at Marvel's TV sensation and go, those S's in sensation are just really strange together. And, a lot of the things circle back to what Mike was saying in terms of how a logo that Paul Rand would do or a graphic design would do, as opposed to a Marvel logo. There's a lot more thinking about it. It's going to be on a sign cut out of letters, then it's going to be projected. It's going to be here. It's going to be there. I think, certainly traditionally, that's not how a comic book letterer would be thinking about a logo. I have to imagine a lot of that's changed now based on the world we're in. There's way more situations where a logo has to be hardy, readable at different sizes and different, 3-dimensional, 2-dimensional, projected, any other way you can imagine, silk screened onto a bag or, sitting on a business card somewhere. So that a lot of that gave some of these really obsessive compulsive modernists that brought their aesthetic over from Europe carte blanche to like go nuts. I feel like to a certain degree. I think it's the grasp on that aesthetic is sort of weakened over time, and it's a little bit more of the Wild West now, thankfully, I think in some ways. But it also, I think it does circle back to just this general sensibility of it being, there's a crassness and a commercialness that is embraced because of what it is. And it's just, it should be that way,
Right. No, it's a totally different context than creating a corporate logo. There's an idea that like comic book design can be bad, but in its badness, it's actually good, like given its context. And I think, I don't know. I mean, I love that. Like as someone who has to think about like what constitute good design versus bad design, like it sort of just like blows up the whole question, which I really appreciate.
Well, I will add, the needs of a logo are much different for a comic book than they are for anything else. When I was first coming up, again, the story was, you're going to go into a comic book store and we all seen those old pictures of the racks and racks of comic books. And basically the only thing you can see is the logo. And so you need to see it from across a room. And it also has to tell you what this book is going to be. Like, what is this book that you're looking at, this Ghost Rider book? Well, look, it's on fire and there's mechanics in there. Oh my God, it means something visually to me. That's why we tend to be so literal, because it's a selling point. It's necessity. The cover copy, like you're saying, sometimes they were in circles because we had to avoid the artwork in certain places. And so you fudge the type a little bit and you mess the kerning up, or you mess up, the line spacing just to sort of fit it into that given space on a cover. But every logo that I've done was like, you have to see it from across a room and know what style genre book you're going to be picking up.
Or only part of it, like on your Alpha Flight t-shirt there, we just see the top. Now I know that logo well because I loved Alpha Flight.
Sure.
But you can tell what that is right away just by seeing the top little bit of it. Yeah.
That also reminds me of something that you brought up, and actually lots of people brought up, which was the corner box on a cover, which is like this really small design detail that I found to be very satisfying as like someone who thinks about like, how like design has to be solving a problem. There's always a reason for something, and that right there, which maybe corner boxes don't exist today to the extent that they once did, but I thought that was like this really clear connection between comic books and design as we think about it. Not so much a question, just an observation.
Well, that's because sometimes they line the books along and you needed to see on the edge what book it was going to be. And again, it was all necessity being the mother of invention. So,
right. Quick poll, because I'm sure people want to know, do you guys have a favorite logo? An impossible question.
There's an Iron Man logo that I actually talk about in the book, which is, I actually don't remember who drew it, unfortunately, but it's like 3-dimensional and it's in perspective and it has bolts around the edge of every letter. And it looks like as if like Iron Man made it, like as if he like spent time in the shop making this logo. And that, I don't even like Iron Man comics, but I remember loving that logo when I saw it as a kid. Like I was the nerd who drew comic book logos instead of drawing comic book heroes, which is, I guess, is obvious that I ended up in design school.
Yeah, that's a tell for sure.
Give it to us, Paul.
Well, I guess I'm going to go Amazing Spider-Man again, just because it's so classic. And I just stared at that, I remember whenever they would change it, I can't remember, they've changed it a couple of times, or with other Spider-Man titles, as you know, there's so many. It never felt right unless it was that original thing, for me. It always felt really foreign.
Mm-hmm.
Mine is Well, I love it for two reasons. First, I'm a Star Wars nerd, and I love Star Wars. But when it was first made, it was sent in to do. Stan famously took it on as as an adaptation, the comic book version, and my mentor friend Jim Novak redesigned that Star Wars logo, which then got pulled back into the movie. Like they basically ripped off the comic book logo to take back into the movie. So everything we see today really is because of Jim. And it's one of those things, you know, about a lot of these letters in the past and these designers, you don't know who they are, what their names are, who did these things. And if you go through a lot of Marvel titles, Jim has done a number of some of the best logos, but I think the fact that he rebranded Star Wars and made it is what it is today, I think sets the bar for me.
Hey, one thing I wanted to add, you know, there is differentiation, of course, between a logo for a particular comic and the Marvel Comics logo. The Marvel Comics logo falls more into the territory where Mike and I exist now, where it has a different need. For instance, my wife designed the DC comic, most recent DC comic logo, which needed to happen. If you remember what it replaced, it was this weird page turning thing. Now it's real. I feel like it's what it should be. Sorry to get off brand here. It's like mentioning a Big Mac at Burger King. But those are different things. They have different functions, but they fall into the same category. But the thing that differentiates them is the function of them.
Right. I mean, the Marvel corporate logo itself has changed a lot over the years, but I think recently, since the 90s, it's always been the red brick. And it's been consistently the red brick. Although I feel like if you were to ask someone at Marvel, they would say like the red brick looks slightly different for the movies than it does for the comic books. And, you know, there are all of these little nuances that I'm sure that the average person doesn't notice, but it has been, you know, remarkably consistent, which is great. Do you have thoughts on the Marvel logo, Paul?
Well, I would agree with you. I think that it's kept its character. DC has changed. If you look at the history of it, it's really gone. And that's one thing with a corporate logo like this. There's a learned familiarity with it. And when you alter something so drastically that it's not recognizable anymore, it's problematic in that world. I feel like in comics, there's much more of an ability to do that. But you know, as you said, the design of the Marvel logo needs to sit there on the screen at the beginning, and things happen with it. You know, that isn't necessarily going to happen on a comic book cover, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Marvel has sort of, it's evolved imperceptibly. If you look at a 60s a Marvel comic, I think you're probably going to see something somewhat so similar, either in typeface.
Yeah, I mean that I should know this because in the book we chart the evolution, and I just frankly cannot remember when the red brick appeared in the 90s, is from what I can recall, and then before that there was something similar to the blockiness.
It wasn't in a block. It was just, you know, below.
Right.
I'm looking up real quick.
It's funny, you know, it's funny that you're bringing this stuff up because I think when we talked about this, I remember being on staff and they had handed this guy, Brad Joyce, next to me, the logo to sort of tweak a bit, the comics part of the logo. And then recently a friend of mine, former fellow letterer, Pat Brosseau, kind of asked online about it. And there is another story behind this that was sort of like at one point, Jim Salicrup, who was an editor up there, wanted the logo changed around a bit. John Romita, sort of as art director, changed it a bit. And then it was handed to another friend of mine, Ken Lopez, who did the comics part of it that was there. So over the years, it's evolved. But like, again, it's sort of like everything is like hapdash, like it's just like, just go get it done. We got to get this done and hand it to the guy sitting at the desk over there and get it done. And you know,
right.
It's hysterical because like DC always seemed to be the corporate company, right? Everything about them always looked nice and clean and crisp, and Marvel was just like, here, take it, we're done. So
I mean, being such a massive company, it's kind of shocking that that's the way things are approached. Like, it's in direct opposition to the way that corporate logos are generally thought about, like where you go and you hire a pentagram, and like it's this whole process, and you come out the other side with like a style guide and a beautiful logo and something that feels definitive and
swatches.
And to Chris, and to Chris's point, 6 months.
Right. Exactly.
I'm looking at a 60s Spider-Man, and that Marvel thing is there. That it's locked up, but it's not in a red box, but it's in a box, and it's very condensed, bold typeface. It's very similar. So they've kept that, and I think it was smart to do it. And they didn't have to go to a fancy design school like Cooper Union to.
Well, there was that
better.
There was like the MTV Marvel logo too, that like felt very MTV. Like it had like the Marvel, and then like the almost like a check. It was slightly different. I don't know. Just
I think we call it the Marvel Slug. That's what we call it.
Okay, the Marvel Slug.
It's just.
So I want to take a couple questions from the Q&A box. One question was from Josh Fong, and he asks, what do you think about Marvel or DC films, use of typography, and whether it captures the style of the comics? Are there good or bad examples? So I think this is an interesting question, just because a lot of people probably wonder about the connection between the vast and arguably more visible universe of Marvel films and comic books. How much of what people see in those films, to your knowledge, is owed to the creativity that was established in the printed pages?
All of it.
All of it.
Look, if you look at all the logos of the Marvel movies these days, they're coming almost directly from the comics. Even so, I worked on a book called Hawkeye that became a TV show just recently, and I did not do the logo for that one, but the artist David Aja did. And they basically took it lock, stock, and barrel and used it for the credit scenes and stuff like that. And so that look of the book carried over into the TV show. The Avengers logo, I think this iteration was Richard Starkings and his crew. Todd Klein has done a number of logos that have been carried over. So I think it's good corporate synergy to have everything match. Even my Venom logo was pretty much used for the movie. They just kind of gave it a liquid effect. So I think it's smart to play it up that way. Again, the DC logos, right? They all tend to be very corporate and safe, and so I don't know. But you guys are the professionals. I'm just the hack working every day. So you guys can tell me the artistic merits of all.
Mike, you gotta field this. Logos in the movies.
Yeah.
Oh, I think there's the only movie where they absolutely got it right, I think, is Into the Spider-Verse, where there is lettering and there is sound effects. It's like bagel, like those kind of amazing moments. And the other type in most Marvel movies is like type over plate, like a regular old typeface over top of what they're shooting, which although is probably fine. And I don't know if I would want like the style of comic book lettering on top of a film like that. Probably not, actually. But Into the Spider-Verse, it was, I don't know, as good as it could be, I would say.
Yeah, I look at the movies and, I have, I'm just shaking my head most of the time because I know where this stuff comes from intimately, but and having an understanding of limitations that might be involved. They definitely want to try to make it feel current for the audience. And I see it more with the costume, the costumes. Disappointing that they always make them black and reduce them, and dying to see, Electro, but it's just not going, Jamie Foxx, I think, played Electro, and it was kind of cool what they did with him, but it's like, where's that yellow thing? Now, I'm sure it wouldn't have worked in the movie, but I'd love to see him try. Maybe they did. Or, Galactus is a cloud, it's like they took the coolest character ever created and then they write him out. And did what? But again, what Galactus would look like in real life probably wouldn't translate. I didn't see the Eternals movie, but from what I could see, they sort of held on to some of Kirby's crazy costumes, but it's, they're trying to make it, they're trying to make it current. So if they were wearing these ridiculous 60s outfits, even if they could translate them from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions, it might not be a good idea anyway. But yeah.
So we have a lot of questions about process. Interestingly, like, I don't know who's in the crowd. Maybe it's like people who are designers or want to get into comic book production. And I'm not sure that this is really the forum for answering those. And so I might stray away from them. Although, like, people are asking about modern workflow software like Jira to manage the work of producing a comic, to coordinate inking. And I feel like, Chris, you probably know more about this than anyone. And maybe this is a topic for another conversation. But I just want to
panel.
Yeah, like I want to acknowledge that people are really interested in the craft of creating a comic. But the question that I want to end on is a very personal question, I guess, from someone in the audience, and they're asking, what was the first Marvel comic that you read that made you so emotional you cried?
Wow.
And maybe the question is, have you ever cried reading a Marvel comic?
I have. Oh, I have. Gwen Stacy dying. Like 122. Amazing Spider-Man 122. Heartbreaking. You guys?
Usually just when the deadlines are so bad, I start crying.
So I am a huge Punisher fan, which is somehow always embarrassing to admit out loud. The owner of my local comic book shop says, at least you're one of those ironic fans. So I guess that makes it a little bit better. I recently, a friend of mine gave me a gift of the first appearance of Spider-Man in Amazing Spider-Man 129. So I have a copy of the first appearance of Punisher now, and I was so touched by the gift. I cried. I couldn't believe it. I just started weeping because it was so joyful. But I don't think I've cried reading a Marvel comic though. But also, when you're reading mostly the Punisher, that's probably why, I would say.
I will give you a serious answer in that I don't think I've ever cried, but I've definitely, like, Alpha Flight was one of my favorites growing up. It was Fantastic Four, Alpha Flight. I love John Byrne as an artist and a writer. Spoiler for everybody who hasn't watched or hasn't seen the issues, but in issue 12, a character dies in the book, and it is such a shock. Like, I kept flipping back and forth the last page is going, wait, no, no, it's not, it's going to change. Something's going to change. And the next issue was basically the funeral. And I was just like, what? So for me, that was like a big moment. I wasn't necessarily crying, but just sort of like, that's what comics can do to you. Like, you get so embedded, especially in the Marvel comic stuff, because they are more human. You just sort of like live and breathe by them, and to see someone die, even though in comics they all come back eventually.
I was gonna say
this one, when I was young enough not to know better, freaked out.
But they didn't. I don't think it. Well, maybe by then they did, because Gwen Stacy, of course, comes back. Horrible. I mean, I really like that whole series with the cloning and everything, but kind of awful. If you really think about it.
Well, the two big ones were, it was Bucky Barnes and Uncle Ben are the two you will never see come back. And then Bucky came back. So who knows? Maybe we'll have, Uncle Ben as a new superhero someday, something. I don't know.
So we're pretty much out of time, but just before we wrap up, I want to let you three, I mean, is there anything that you want to ask each other as comic book fans, as designers, as a letterer? If not, that's okay, but want to give you the chance before we hop off.
Well, Chris, you mentioned some of the greats in lettering. Who would you, if we wanted to look those people up, who would they be?
Wow. So many. Gaspar Saladino seems to be like the grandfather of us all. Sam Rosen, Artie Simic, like I said, in the bullpen, Maury Kuramoto, Danny Crespi, Jim Novak, Phil Felix, Ken Lopez, Pat Brasso, Bill Oakley, Todd Klein, Richard Starkings. The list goes on and on. There are just so many that don't get the credit they deserve. I'm sitting here for whatever reason, I don't know, but all those people deserve the spotlight more than I do. So just next time you open up a comic book, just take a look at the names in the lettering department and give them a little wink and a nod for me.
Well, thank you, all of you, for taking the time to do this. This was a really fun conversation. And just, as a little bit of housekeeping reminder that you can get the book at the Gestalten site and you get 15% off. Sorry, it's a little bit of a sales pitch now, but through February 28th with the code, and you can find the code in the chat. So nothing else from me. And again, it was great to talk to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz.
Thanks, Liz.
Fantastic.
All right.